from Psychedelics Today, your host, coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have Brad Burge from MAPS. Brad is the Director of Strategic Communications over at MAPS, and he really helps us understand everything that's going on at MAPS right now. It's really fun. We get into some stuff about the trials, status of the trials. We get a bit into some of the Compass Pathways conversation, which many of you may or may not be aware of, but that's a topic that's going to be coming up, I think, for a while for many of us in the psychedelic world. So stay tuned on that one. Don't know where it's going to land, but hopefully somewhere great for everybody. So we go all over the map with Brad, and I think it's a great podcast. So I'll just kind of stop rambling here and give a couple messages and jump right into the show. So if you want to support us, there's a lot of ways to do so. We've got an amazing class online called Navigating Psychedelics. Navigating Psychedelics is a huge class that's essentially the 101 that we wish we had as people in high school or as undergrads in college. So, how do you make less mistakes with psychedelics and drugs in general? How do you prepare and execute a trip? And how do you land well? And it also comes with a lot of master classes from folks all over the psychedelic space. And they talk about their particular specialties. And I think it's just an amazing class. So check that out. That's probably the best way you can support us is by buying that. That's right on our website. You'll see links for it. You could also find it at our shop. The shop also has tons of t-shirts and all sorts of neat stuff like mugs, shower curtains, if you're up for that kind of thing, and more, sweatshirts. So we would love you to be wearing Psychedelics Today clothes around. It's a great way to break the ice in conversations. You wear it to a concert or to a yoga studio. You're probably going to end up in an interesting conversation at the very least. If you would like to leave us a few dollars a month, we would love to have that. That'll help us keep the lights on. Patreon.com/psychedelics today, Patreon.com, psychedelics today. And you could donate as little as $2 a month and you get some rewards for that kind of donation and above. So please, please, please check that out. It would be a huge support to us. And as always, leave us a review. We would love to have your review on Facebook or iTunes, letting other folks know that you like this show and that they should probably check it out too. So that is it for me on this intro. We'll catch you on the other side. Enjoy this interview with Brad Burge, Director of Strategic Communications with MAP. Today on the show, we have Brad Burge. Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me on. Always a pleasure to work with you. And thanks so much for getting the word out so much about what MAPS is doing.
Yeah, we're strong supporters of you guys and love what you're doing. So what's your role over there at MAPS? Media director?
My formal role is Director of Strategic Communications, which is kind of intentionally vague. So I kind of do a bunch of different things. Most of my day is handling media inquiries. We get a ton of media inquiries. We send out press releases. We try to just maximize how much the media are talking about psychedelic research. And so that's a lot of what I do. And then I also handle publishing our books and the MAPS Bulletin, our triannual magazine publication, do general sort of branding and strategic messaging stuff. There's a lot to do and more all the time.
So I used to work for a very small company, like 150 people, and now I'm working for a company that's like 14,000 people. And I can totally understand how, like, a small organization like MAPS, you have to like really rotate through stuff. So
oh my gosh. Yeah, and it started off small. When I started as an intern in 2009, there were 6 employees. And now between MAPS and our wholly owned for-profit subsidiary, MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, there's 45 employees, half of whom are full-time staff members. And then we have who knows how many contractors and sponsored researchers and so on and so forth. So that growth from like 6 to 45 has been, MAPS has been like a really successful Silicon Valley startup, or at least comparable.
That's lovely. 45. How many people do you have in the Santa Cruz office?
We probably have 20 or so that actually work there out of the office. The rest of the staff are all distributed across the country, and really across the world too, more so as we expand.
So there are European employees?
We might not have employees yet. We're certainly working with consultants.
Right.
And we just hosted a training for therapists in the Netherlands a couple of months ago. We had people from a couple of dozen different countries, or at least a dozen different countries. And these are all therapists in training to be part of the phase 3 clinical trials in Europe that we're going to be starting next year.
Oh, that's cool. I kind of didn't realize you guys had access in Europe. That's lovely. So let's talk about phase 3.
Yeah.
So you just began formal recruitment for participants in the study?
Yeah, we did. Our long-awaited phase 3 trials. We formally started those last month, and we started recruiting. Our formal recruitment start, actually when we made the announcement, was on November 29th, so just a couple of weeks ago. We're doing those phase 3 trials at 14 sites in the US and Canada and Israel. And the first phase of that is going to be enrolling between 100 and 150 volunteers, all with severe PTSD. We'll also be doing a second part of the phase 3 trials once that first chunk of 100 to 150 are treated. We don't know how many more we'll be treating. It'll be depending on how the interim results look at that point. So we're actually formally starting. We've formally started the recruitment for a number of those sites. We're recruiting for our site in North Hollywood, down in LA. Our UC San Francisco site is recruiting. Also, our Boulder, Colorado, and Fort Collins, Colorado sites are both recruiting, as is our New Orleans site and our private practice site in New York City, as well as our site in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Those are all recruiting, and then a bunch more will be recruiting again. We'll be opening up recruitment really soon. By the way, if you or anybody else wants to check that out, we are listed on clinicaltrials.gov, or if you go to maps.org/participate, you can find information about where we're recruiting and all of that there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And there's like a real lot of sites, right? Like I think greater than 20 sites in total as part of phase 3, or
14 right now.
Okay.
For the U.S. phase 3 trial. So that's in coordination with the FDA. That's for approval here in the U.S. The European trials, that's going to involve another dozen or so sites spread across Europe.
Oh, that's really fantastic. What are the complicated factors with Europe? Like we understand U.S. kind of, but totally different organizations, right?
Oh yeah, totally. The European Medicines Agency is the FDA equivalent for the European Union, and it handles drug approvals for most member states in the European Union. There's some complexity there. The individual countries still need to make their own decisions at some level about it, and we're trying to figure out what that regulatory nightmare looks like. A major challenge is language in Europe. We've already translated some of our protocols and hired independent raters to evaluate the psychotherapy process and the research in Israel. So we have Hebrew-speaking researchers and therapists and study staff, and that was for the phase 2 trials. And then we also are working on French documents for the phase 3 trial that we're going to have in Montreal. So we've already got some practice translating all of this information, but it's very hard and it's very expensive. We have to make sure that we have people who are trained therapists. We have to make sure that all of the protocols have been translated, and we have to make sure that the people evaluating the studies, the adherence raters, can understand the language. And so far, what we've seen is the effectiveness of the therapy does not seem to depend on the language, but that is something that the regulators will be looking at.
Well, that's really great. Are there any major roadblocks in the U.S. right now, like since the FDA fast-tracked MDMA for you?
Yeah, that's the breakthrough therapy designation that you're talking about.
Right.
That was in the fall of last year, that really opened up a lot of eyes to what we're doing by highlighting that the FDA already, based on the research that we've done, already sees this as a treatment that could potentially be a breakthrough compared to the currently available treatments for PTSD. The main roadblocks now are for MAPS, at least organizationally speaking, managing this growth. Now 45 employees, like we were saying, and how do we go from being a tiny nonprofit to a multinational drug research organization? So we're bringing in as much expertise as we can from the pharmaceutical industry. We have consultants who have worked for a long time. We also have staff who worked for a long time in the pharmaceutical industry, also in the commercial insurance industry. We're talking with them about various barriers to access and how we might be able to get the treatment to as many people as possible. So I think the phase 3 trials are going really well. We have all of these sites already enrolling, and we expect by 2020 they'll be completed, and the FDA could make a decision as soon as 2021. So now we're focused on more downstream of the approval, as far as sort of where the cutting edge of our thought and strategic planning is going, is what happens once we actually get this treatment approved. Then we'll have an approved psychedelic for use in combination with psychotherapy, only used in combination with psychotherapy. But what happens then? How do we get this treatment to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible? So one way that we're doing that is training therapists. And we're greatly expanding our therapist training program, which in the phase 2 trials and up until now has only been available for people who are going to be researchers in our phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. But one of the major bottlenecks for getting the treatment out there to as many people as possible is how many therapists do we have trained and certified in the treatment method? Because in order to administer MDMA assisted psychotherapy, therapists will need to get a certification. They'll need to complete a training course provided by MAPS in order to administer it. So it requires a specialized training, and we have to get that training to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. We really hope to educate thousands more therapists and counselors and social workers in how to administer this treatment once it's approved in the next couple of years.
And what does that training program look like for folks who are curious? Right now, the main thing on the market is the CIIS program, but that isn't necessarily applicable to this MAPS training, right?
That's right. So trainings like at the California Institute for Integral Studies in psychedelic therapies, that's a great background for anybody wanting to get involved in the field, to learn about transpersonal psychology, which is kind of the foundational psychological theory behind MDMA assisted psychotherapy. It's great. It's great exposure to the field in general. But in order to actually administer the therapy, first of all, you'll need a prescribing physician to actually prescribe the drug. But the physician isn't going to have to be there in the room. It could be a certified therapist. So that involves having a professional therapeutic licensure and a current licensure. That means licensed clinical social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, and that kind of thing. We don't yet have the complete list of what exact professional credentials will be required, but they'll need to be practicing therapists. In the studies and thinking about going forward once the treatment is approved, we've also talked about bringing in intern therapists, so people who are still students in training, people who are working towards having a therapeutic degree. They may be able to get credit for actually conducting the research or conducting the therapeutic sessions in coordination with a licensed therapist. So that might be one way to expand the pool of people who qualify.
It's really cool. It's a great way to get hours if you're an intern, or if you need to get your intern hours done. Before you graduate. It sure is. Yeah, a lot of people are getting into the field right now because they know that MDMA and soon thereafter psilocybin will probably be approved very soon, and they realize that, oh my gosh, I can be a therapist and legally administer psychedelic therapy. So there's just an explosion of interest in the field right now. Yeah, I'm certainly seeing it. I'm sure you guys have seen a big help from Michael Pollan's book and him recently getting on the whole bunch of 2018 top 10 lists, as I'm sure kind of cemented
I just
that.
saw that. Yeah. How to Change Your Mind was on the New York Times Book Review's editors list of the 10 most important books of 2018, just alongside 9 other mostly fictional, but based in reality books about various super important social issues. So psychedelics, according to the New York Times Book Reviewers, are up there with racial justice and economic disparity as far as the books they listed.
Yeah, it's really great to see. Hopefully someday they get on the environment train, but maybe psychedelics is a good start. So gateway drugs
it sure is. It sure is. Yeah, a little more ecological consciousness.
Right. Gateway drug for the environment. So, all right. So people can try to sign up as a participant at clinicaltrials.gov. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's where the information is. There's contact information for the various recruiting study sites there. Keeping in mind that we get tons and tons of inquiries, and we have 100 to 150 spots, and many, many thousands of people interested in getting into these. So if people apply and they don't get in, best advice, just keep persisting and look for more opportunities soon. But yes, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, and if you're in the area of those treatment sites, then you'll have a better chance of getting in.
Cool. So that's actually a good segue into access. So what does access and insurance coverage look like? Or maybe we can start with expanded access. What are the plans for that? And then move towards like post-approval for phase 3?
Yeah, totally. That's the order it's going to go in. So expanded access is otherwise known as compassionate use. It's a program that the FDA has to allow access to treatments that are still in phase 3 clinical trials that have shown some promise. So to allow people to receive that treatment outside of the research. It's not completely outside of the research. Expanded access results do get included in our data submission to the FDA, but we don't collect efficacy results. So we're not submitting data to the FDA from expanded access who did well and who didn't do as well. We're only submitting the risk data, which is to say if anybody has any surprise side effects from MDMA, then we would submit that to the FDA if it came from expanded access. And the reason there is because it's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. You go into expanded access and you get accepted into it, you're not going to get placebo. In the trials, just for clarity, in the actual trials, the people who do get assigned placebo, if they do get placebo, everyone is then given the option of going back through the study again, this time with the full dose of MDMA, and that's how they do placebo-controlled psychiatric trials, because it's not fair to just randomly assign people. It's like you go through all the trouble to enroll in this trial, and then you get the placebo. So people who get the placebo are given the option. I don't think anybody's ever turned it down to go back and get the full dose. So in expanded access, it's just the standard dose it's going to be either 80 or 120 milligrams of MDMA combined with psychotherapy. So what is expanded access? Expanded access is going to be offered in a whole variety of treatment centers across the U.S. And those will be getting started in the next 6 months to a year. So MAPS will be making information available about where those expanded access clinics are as they get approved. They have to go through their own special approval process with the FDA and also the DEA. Because since it's still in clinical trials, MDMA is still going to be a Schedule 1 drug. So there's this additional approval and therefore expense necessary. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 10 to 20 expanded access clinics appearing in the next couple of years.
Well, that's really great. I also wouldn't be surprised. Are there certain requirements, like they have to pretty much meet the same requirements the study sites had to, meaning like, DEA review of your safety protocol and appropriate
Yep, all that stuff, all that stuff. So you have to have a qualified treatment team, therapists with their current licenses. You have to have a space that's appropriate. You have to be able to get a DEA Schedule 1 license, which means passing a background check and all of that fun stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So you felons steer clear. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's going to be a big deal once expanded access happens. So 6 months to a year. That's really cool. I'm
very excited to hear some of the stories of people coming out of expanded access and not having to wait until phase 3 is completely over to hear those stories. Because if there's one thing that changes public perspectives around psychedelics and psychedelic therapy, it's individual stories of people who have been healed or transformed or positively affected in some way by them, or even negatively affected. If people just shared all of their stories, I think we'd be in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Given, is it only the Boulder site that's made their numbers public? What was it, 72% their success?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, we've also published the results from one other, or actually two other phase 2 trials. One or three. I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So actually, we two of our phase 2 trials were in South Carolina. Right. One it was focused on veterans, police officers, and firefighters. That was published last year. And then earlier than that, there was our first completed phase 2 trial, which was in veterans and survivors of sexual assault and abuse and people with PTSD from a whole variety of causes. And then we had our Swiss study of MDMA Assisted Psychotherapy for PTSD, also published. But the most recent was the Boulder trial, which was our largest one. And that did find that a full year after treatment with 3 MDMA assisted psychotherapy sessions, people didn't have 76% of people didn't have PTSD anymore in that study.
Right. Yeah, which is astounding. I always, whenever we talk about this to people, I'm always like, okay, so, treatment-resistant PTSD, 76%. Imagine what happens when that gets expanded to standard PTSD.
Right.
You can only extrapolate.
These are all people. Yeah, you can only imagine. These are all people who tried a lot of other things, and they hadn't worked for them. And also, it's not just a symptom reduction. It's not that 76% of people are feeling better a year later. It's actually much closer to 100% if you look at the data, who are doing better a year later. What that 76% is people who are feeling so much better, they wouldn't have been allowed into the study.
Right. You wouldn't even be categorized as having PTSD, not just lower.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they don't have
the
occasional flashback or like little anxiety or something like that. But it means it's like really they don't have PTSD according to the standard diagnosis.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's really great. So once expanded access happens, what does that look like for a patient? Like they can reach out to the clinic, try to get accepted as a patient, and then perhaps I don't think insurance will cover expanded access, right? I'll have to complete phase 3 before that's an option. Is that right?
Exactly right. In fact, I just got off the phone with one of our consultants in the commercial insurance industry who's helping us kind of figure out how insurance is going to work once we have approval. It's actually a lot more complicated than you might think, or maybe you might expect it would be complicated if you have any experience with medical forms. But yes, expanded access won't be covered by insurance. You'll apply individually as a patient to the site, and if you get accepted, presuming there's going to be a significant waiting list, then that would have to be paid out of pocket. We are looking into ways that we can help fund at least some patients, at least a portion of their expanded access, finding some way to do some kind of patient support. We'd have to do fundraising for that, and we're not a $100 million pharmaceutical company, and we have to find a way to make that happen. But it is something that we're thinking about in order to ensure that there's as much access in expanded access as possible. It's really more down the road looking at insurance and public health care plans after that. That's going to ensure the widest access for folks. The actual cost of the MDMA itself is an incredibly small fraction of the total cost of the treatment.
Right.
What we have here is, the drug combined with psychotherapy, and it's the hours and hours of psychotherapy that actually cost a significant amount. So, and that can be hard to cover for most people, probably. So we are looking at ways that we can reduce that cost in the long term. Ways that using just one therapist instead of two therapists, or reducing the total number of psychotherapy sessions. It's a 12-week course of psychotherapy and about 100 hours of psychotherapy in that time in the phase 3 clinical trials. We would expect that the results might be not quite as good if there wasn't as much psychotherapeutic support before, during, and after. But that would have to be explored in other clinical trials. Also, once the treatment is approved, it won't have to necessarily be that 12-week, 100-hour or so course of psychotherapy that people go through. They will have probably a preliminary session, middle sessions, and then integrative sessions. So there will be a sort of a range of different ways that the treatment is provided. But again, it's that cost of psychotherapy. But then you compare that to paying for psychotherapy plus medication for decades, which is often what happens with PTSD treatment. Then it doesn't end up looking like so much. And that's part of our proposal. And that's going to be part of our presentation to private insurers once we get closer to approval. That actually long term, we are improving people's quality of life. We're actually reducing healthcare costs in the long run by making this upfront investment in a few sessions of MDMA assisted psychotherapy. In the phase 3 trials, just to support that, we're collecting information about emergency room visits, so future emergency room visits, and cigarette smoking, and seeing if things like that are also reduced from MDMA assisted psychotherapy. So if that might be part of an economic argument to both private insurers and public health care plans like Medicare, Medicaid, Affordable Care Act, and so on.
Do you know if there's been meetings with groups like TRICARE for the federal employees or veteran employees?
Good question. Yeah. So the VA is kind of another situation entirely because they also deal with the problem of, or the challenge of having active duty personnel too. And it's kind of once the VA gets on board with it, they're going to want to, control how it's delivered. They're going to want to control how the news gets out. So I think it's likely based on the results in veterans in particular and the amount of support we've gotten from veterans groups around this, that the VA could get on board sooner rather than later and offer it to retired military. The rest of the federal government, we don't know yet. And sort of historically, federal healthcare plans and state healthcare plans have lagged pretty significantly behind, like a couple of years behind private insurers. When they take things up, they're just more complicated and just have more bureaucracy and more complex calculations, I guess, than the private insurers. But it can take longer for those public plans to come into effect. We're addressing all of these simultaneously, and not quite at the point where we're having meetings with the major insurer groups. But that is absolutely in the near future.
And that's really interesting. Yeah. One of the goofy arguments I hear, so here's often is like, this is just being used to make war easier without regard to like the human toll that some people throw out there. Sorry, we took such a 90-degree turn here, but came into mind. Then I'm hearing like people kind of freaking out like, oh, it's going to be used for drone pilots. I'm like, well, these are humans with real PTSD, guys. Like, they are suffering. You're going to say we shouldn't allow them to suffer, decrease their suffering, and access to the most amazing medical care. It's just this weird argument about like soldiers don't deserve it or something. And I'm like, no.
You could make, you could make the same argument. You don't want to give soldiers opiates,
right?
for pain. I mean, because they don't deserve it, and that's clearly absurd. These are human beings, and we're not talking about making people into better fighters. First of all, we're talking primarily about veterans. We're talking about retired military who aren't going to be redeployed, who aren't going to go back into service. And actually, from the military folks that I've spoken with and that we've spoken with, there's actually there's a largely or completely unspoken assumption within military culture that PTSD makes you a better fighter. And there's some sort of rationale behind that. PTSD is a response to being in a highly exposed and dangerous situation, or you perceive it as a dangerous situation. It doesn't matter whether it's real or whether it's imagined. You can get PTSD from either. And so PTSD, with its numbing, its hypervigilance, and its kind of withdrawal from the world that it tends to produce, that's effective in combat. That actually does make you a better fighter. It's when you return back to a regular life. The body isn't designed to stay in that state of traumatizing, hyperarousal, dangerous situations, explosions, or in the case of people with PTSD from sexual assault, from being sexually threatened or assaulted over a long period of time or a short period of time. It's just the body isn't made to hold that level of trauma. So people come back and or the experience ends and they have difficulty integrating into their lives, and that's where the challenge comes from. So as far as the military is concerned, that may be where the resistance is to treating active duty personnel, is that you're trying to send them back in, and MDMA assisted psychotherapy is it's going to make them a better lover, not a better fighter.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And I've been reading a ton of books about war recently to figure out how to relate to this whole concept. And like the trauma is certainly kind of useful, and perhaps not so much in drone pilots, but perhaps, I don't know. I have not been in those rooms, so I have no idea. All I know is from TV. But and these guys, in a lot of cases, it was their best option at age 18, or they were tricked into it somehow. So, they're still kids, and they've, signed up for this thing, and that's their life now. You can't really just run away from it. So let's have some compassion, people, for these folks.
Yeah. War affects people on all sides, all sides of the conflict. If psychedelics teach us, if there's one commonality in psychedelic experiences, it's that things are connected. Very few people lapse into solipsism after a few LSD trips. It happens, but not that often. And it's both sides of the conflict. That's part of the reason why MAPS has done research in Israel. We attempted to do research in Jordan, but the Jordanian regulatory authorities weren't ready to do any clinical trials, much less MDMA clinical trials. We are speaking with PTSD experts in Europe who are experts on endemic conflict and the PTSD that often results from living in conflict regions, whether it's the Middle East or the Balkans, or innumerable other places on this planet these days. There's just so many populations being traumatized on a regular basis that finding a treatment that can address that, not as like a last line, try other things for years kind of thing, but as a let's get this to people right away kind of thing. That's super important for us, and it's really motivating for me.
It'd be really fascinating if there was a way to actually study like a group of 20 Palestinians, a group of 20 Israelis, and you put them in a room after their therapy or something, before and after. That would be quite the experiment.
It sure would. I would love to have TV cameras in there.
So, okay. So from here, maybe let's just kind of loosely talk about Compass, and we can, figure out what we want to talk about it.
Sure.
So obviously it's somehow been a really hot button issue. I can kind of understand why, these people have been in this kind of underground, scary, politically charged world, kind of risking life and limb to do psychedelic stuff, and all of a sudden they see a business come in. that's acting like a real normal pharmaceutical company,
Mm-hmm.
and be a little scared by it, right?
Mm.
And now there's some formal partnerships between MAPS and Compass, so people are starting to get a little nervous about like, what does that mean? Maybe you can kind of spin.
I
talk
think
about
you're
that.
hitting something right on the nail of the head right there, Joe. Is that there is no formal partnership
Oh, okay.
between MAPS and Compass. Those are probably inventions of the social media atmosphere.
Okay.
MAPS has clarified that on several occasions, including in our MAPS bulletin that was just released. It's on maps.org/bulletin. Right now, we have an article in there from Compass, as well as a little statement explaining why we included an article from Compass in there. And in there, Katya Malyoskaya, who's one of the co-founders with George Goldsmith of Compass, explains their approach and their strategy. So I super highly recommend that as some additional background on who they are and what their intentions are. But I totally understand the suspicion. I mean, we are in a world where capitalism is running rampant, and drug companies are making exorbitant profits on drugs that barely work or drugs that are explicitly harmful. And we've seen the role of pharmaceutical companies now very clearly in promoting the opioid epidemic. I think if, like the top 2 or 3 things that Americans are angry at right now, I think the pharmaceutical industry is one of them. Myself included. That's in fact why I got involved with MAPS. I wasn't a raver kid. I wasn't using a bunch of psychedelics and then found, here's a productive outlet. A lot of people find us that way. So they want to contribute something back based on their experiences. But my experiences were with the pharmaceutical industry and being drugged on pharmaceuticals that I really don't think I should have been on from a very, very young age. And I just know how common that is. And then when I saw what MAPS was doing, combined with my very few early psychedelic experiences, I saw very clearly, wow, this is an antidote to the for-profit sort of just the manipulative pharmaceutical industry, because it's a treatment that is only administered a few times. It's not going to make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars because of that. It's going to be a much lower magnitude of sales than drugs that are sold every day, that are taken every day for months or years or decades, which is most prescription drugs out there. So that's how I came to it. And when I heard about Compass, I was excited that it's a sign of success that for-profit companies are now getting interested in advancing these medicines. MAPS is a nonprofit, and most of the other actors, the other organizations in the psychedelic research space have been nonprofits. And the reason has been because there wasn't any possibility of investment before now. If you asked people to give you $1 million because you promised that they'll have a return on that $1 million, and you said it was for psychedelics, generally it wouldn't work. People are like, I don't know, psychedelics, it's a little controversial. Like, are you sure it's going to actually work out? Now it's pretty clear based on the MDMA and psilocybin phase 3 trials that it's going to work out. I really think psychedelic research is here to stay. And for that reason, people are kind of flocking to it more. And they see not just a way to change the world, making a donation through a tax deductible nonprofit, but they see a way to change the world and recoup their investment. So that's more sustainable for some people than just making a donation. So I think what we're seeing is a cultural change that is helping people see, well, this is here to stay, and it's possible that I can recoup my investment. And once you get the investor world involved, you have this whole giant flow of resources that can come in to really bootstrap treatments, devices, products, anything into the public consciousness. So people have critiques of capitalism, and I have critiques of capitalism that it has a tendency to put profit first. But I do believe, and maybe this comes down to a matter of belief, maybe it's about economic class or privilege. It may very well be, but that money can be used. It can be used for good as well as as well as evil. MAPS has raised over $70 million for our work over the last 33 years, all from donations, minus $2 million of that, which came from the state of Colorado for our marijuana research. So that's significant too. But as far as the for-profits, I sincerely believe that Compass is in it for the right reasons. They're not patenting psilocybin. There's no way to patent psilocybin because it's a naturally occurring compound. Instead, what they're patenting is a particular way of using psilocybin in combination with a particular form of psychotherapy administered a certain number of times using their particular brand of psilocybin capsules. Now, if somebody wanted to make other capsules, synthesize it in a different way, administer it with another form of therapy, then they can do that.
So here's the valid question, or I guess response I've been giving a lot of people. This is one particular way to make GMP psilocybin. I believe creativity is the thing holding people back from developing another form, right?
That's one thing. There is a thing related to the safety data.
Right.
So safety data is what is necessary to be submitted along with any efficacy data to FDA in order to get a drug product approved. Compass owns its own safety data. There's a long, complex backstory to how that happened, but you can have proprietary safety data. So somebody else who wants to develop their own form of psilocybin would have to either acquire, that is purchase, the safety data from Compass or develop their own safety data, which would be at a significant expense.
Right.
So there is the additional cost, but with patents, with patents, the idea isn't just to prevent others from using it. Part of the goal of a patent is to protect an investment for investors. So if you patent a drug, and that means that no others can make and promote that particular drug, then investors will have a reason to believe that, well, there's going to be a significant enough market share that there will be an income and I will get my investment back. Therefore, I will make the investment. If they didn't believe that, they wouldn't make the investment. The research wouldn't happen. If you don't patent it and somebody else comes along, then they might charge slightly less, or they might have a better marketing team. And as a result, the original patent would be or the original drug would be undercut, and those investors wouldn't get their money back. So that's part of what a patent strategy is ensuring that investors feel motivated to provide the capital in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's kind of fundamental to this stage of capitalism, I guess. I live in the software world where everything is super litigious all the time. Like my company is probably in the mix of, 200 lawsuits right now with,
and it's just like how you go about your day, right?
Right. Right. And they're at the scale where they can afford it. Right. So, new entrants would, have to be able to afford that kind of thing. And I think they know that they would, if they want to enter, they've got to be able to pay to play and at that scale. Right.
We're entering like a totally new world. A lot of the folks who have been supporting MAPS and supporting psychedelic research, either financially or just by talking to their friends or by listening to your podcast, for years and years, are understandably a little bit like, holy cow, like what are we getting into? There's this whole complicated bureaucratic capitalist nightmare that is our regulatory system. And that is why MAPS exists, is to cut through that red tape, to jump through all of those hoops, and to make this a mainstream thing. Now, that's not our end game. Making MDMA into a medicine for use only in therapeutic contexts is not our end game. Look what happened with Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, how popular that's been, New York Times bestseller, Amazon #1 for a while. He's talking about a great deal more than therapeutic use. He's talking about consciousness and spirituality, and about ecological consciousness. And millions of people are reading that book. And it's from a trusted reputable journalist, probably one of the most trusted writers on the planet. That's really changing. That's really changing a lot of minds, and that's what we're trying to promote. We're trying to make it possible for somebody like Michael Pollan, or Joe Rogan, or Gwyneth Paltrow, or the president of the United States come out and say, "This is a thing. This is a thing that we want to support. This is we want to move in this direction because the psychedelics can be useful for medical purposes. Let's allow broader public conversation about them." So all of this, new companies entering the space and the benefits and the challenges that brings, that's a sign of success, I think.
Yeah. I think with success is going to come new challenges. It's never going to be clean cut the way certain people want it to be. It's going to be a dynamic process of hopefully conversations. I'd love to see more openness from that group, but I understand why they're not so open currently. But yeah, I just think, MAPS is really open. Rick is extraordinarily open and willing to talk to folks about these things. And, the way he's gone way out of his way to communicate to people that have concerns and journalists and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting. And I love that attitude and energy he's bringing to it. So what else is going on that's of interest to you or exciting? I know you maybe wanted to talk about Zendo a little bit.
Oh yeah, the Zendo project. I love the Zendo project. It's just fantastic balance to what we're doing with the clinical trials. And you mentioned you haven't been to Burning Man yet, but you're going this next year, maybe?
Correct. That's the plan. I say I'm going. I have no idea how hard it is to get a ticket, so we'll see.
It's pretty hard, but I think all you have to do is wave a magic wand and really want it, and then you can probably score one. and fork out the cash, because geez, talk about economics privilege. It costs a lot of money to go to Burning Man, but it is a fantastic pressure cooker, an experimental space for art and activism and freedom of expression, and also for public health projects. My two favorite projects at Burning Man that are supported now by the Burning Man organization are the Bureau of Erotic Discourse or BED, and the Zendo project. And I'm just talking about Burning Man in specific because it's kind of a flagship festival in some ways. I know there's people who'd hesitate to call Burning Man a festival, but it kind of is, and a lot of other festivals follow in its footsteps. And what Burning Man does, so the rest of the festival culture often does. And in recent years, the organization has just been supremely supportive of the Zendo project, to the point of distributing stickers and brochures to every single one of the 70,000 plus attendees that come in the gates, so they know where the Zendo project is located, what our services are. For those who don't know, that's our psychedelic harm reduction or a psychedelic peer support space that we bring to Burning Man and lots of other festivals all over the world. And it's a physical space where people can come who are going through difficult psychedelic experiences and sit for as long as they need to with somebody lending a compassionate ear, and either sleep or talk about their experience or cry or just have a hand on their shoulder or whatever it is that you need to do. These festivals can be very alienating places if you get separated from your friends and you're on psychedelics, which can bring up all sorts of unexpected, unconscious material. And the Zendo project is there to kind of catch that, and to catch the people who are feeling without support. We've helped over 4,000 guests since 2012 in the Zendo project, and that's not nearly enough. It's not nearly as many people as need it, but it's a great start.
Absolutely. Tim Ferriss, a popular podcaster, author, has come out about attending and participating as a Zendo, what would you call him? Sitter?
Volunteer sitter, sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have there been any other public
great one.
figures that have helped out?
None that I know of that want to be public. Actually, really none that I know of. Tim Ferriss did that amazing had that amazing conversation with Aubrey Marcus, both of whom are big supporters of our work, both of whom have financially supported our work as well as spread the word on their social media channels about us. Tim talked about his experience there sitting for a couple. I highly recommend that conversation.
Right. Absolutely. Now, is there I know Sarah Gill and Ryan Borga go around training people here and there. Is there a best place for people to learn about trainings they can jump on?
Yeah, well, zendoproject.org is where we keep updated with all of our upcoming trainings. You can also sign up for the email list and sign up for notifications about volunteer opportunities there. We are always looking for new volunteers. There's an application process that goes out prior to the festivals and the events where we provide the services. The trainings we offer actually on-site at the events a lot of times. And then we are working on more ways to make that even more accessible. So we're planning now, and this is the first time I've mentioned it, so this is the big debut. We're planning to do a Zendo Project webinar series in the late spring, early summer, where we're going to be including components of the training. So it'll definitely help people learn how to be better sitters, how to be present, and how to help their friends or themselves who are having difficult psychedelic experiences. Also talking about integration support, tips for going to festivals, tips for festival organizers, that thing. So we've had great success with webinars in the past. We just completed one, our psychedelic science webinar series that was really successful. And we'll be hosting one specifically about harm reduction right up at the beginning of the festival season in 2019.
Well, that's lovely. Yeah. We do need to see more of this. How have you seen a tactic that's helpful for convincing a festival to have this kind of service there? You know, given the Rave Act and like how difficult that can be for organizers or promoters. There's got to be a talk track you can use.
Yeah, the Rave Act. So we got great news about that earlier this year, and that's when the Department of Justice clearly stated that providing free water and drug education at events are not violations of the Rave Act.
I thought it was just free water. I didn't realize education too. That's lovely.
And drug education, yeah. So things like Dance Safe, a group that provides a lot of great drug education at festivals, Zendo Project. You know, these are not violations of the Rave Act according to the Justice Department. The Rave Act was the Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy Act, and it's been the big scary monster, or at least the threat of a monster that has prevented a lot of festival organizers from implementing quote unquote harm reduction policies because of the fear, and to my knowledge, this was never actually prosecuted, but the fear that providing free water and education about drugs was the same as promoting drug use. So that a concert venue, a club, or a festival could be prosecuted essentially as a drug den. But this year, after a lot of pressuring, a group called amendtheraveact.org just did amazing work in talking with the Attorney General and getting them to make this statement. So there's been a lot of policy work and advocacy work behind the scenes. And I'd like to think that some of the shifting attitudes around psychedelics have helped with this. So here it's not the Justice Department saying that we support drug use or that we support harm reduction. They're just saying that free water and drug education are not violations. So that's been huge, and that has been opening up a lot more festival organizers to reaching out and saying, "Hey, can we get you here at our festival?" It's being seen more as something they need alongside medical than as something they're scared of.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. I'm very excited that drug education is somewhat protected now and deemed safe. It's super cool. That should make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, for sure. We should be definitely celebrating that.
We had a big win with drug education this year. We had one of our friends / employees, Marissa, go to Shambhala, and I think it's Alberta, Canada, and do a ton of drug education, hand out tons of safety flyers. And I that's actually an interesting festival, and there's 0 alcohol allowed at the festival.
Wow.
But I don't think they seize anything else from you on the way in to the festival, which is fascinating.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, I'd like to see their ratio of emergency room visits compared to festivals that allow alcohol.
Right. Near 0, I bet.
I've got to guess.
Yeah. So that's, really fascinating. What's going to be interesting is to see how Electric Forest plays out this year, because I know they have some real issues with harm reduction education for some reason. Hopefully we can change that before it happens, but time will tell.
Yeah.
Cool. Roughly 7 minutes left to talk. Are there any other hot topics that are worth bringing up?
Well,
I've got one. How much?
Yeah, great. Go for it.
How much for a gram of MAPS Public Benefit Corp MDMA, or per serving, is the estimate?
Per serving.
Just so I know if I'm getting a good deal.
Yeah, right. So for the GMP MDMA that we had made and has now been shipped out to our various phase 3 research locations, that cost $400,000 to manufacture, and then another $400,000 for the encapsulation and labeling, and that was for a kilogram.
Oof.
So that's so we're talking $400 a gram.
Well,
yeah.
It's tough, but for pharmaceutical grade, that's really an acceptable markup, I suppose.
Yeah, it's got its whole pedigree. It's totally reproducible, and the intention is to make a pharmaceutical medicine out of it. We right. got it. So it's not distributed in bottles. That the therapist's office won't be getting bottles of MDMA, or like you can reach in and grab a few, because you never need a few. It's really just one at a time for the context of therapy. So they're in bubble packs. They're in the little, individual, you kind of pop one out and that's it. So that helps communicate, well, this is only a one-time thing until you get it again in therapy. You're never taking it home. And they're, the capsules we're using for the GMP are kind of this burnt orange color, because we got a deal on them.
That's great.
Nothing too symbolic there.
Right. So it's 80 milligrams and 120 milligrams.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and then followed in the therapy protocol by a supplemental dose of half of that.
Okay.
So 40 or 60 milligrams MDMA, an hour and a half or 2 hours after the first dose. So we have. I'm not sure what doses we're making them in, but I think 80 milligrams. I think probably 40 milligrams and 60 milligrams.
Yeah, that's cool. So another question, are we going to have a psychedelic science conference in 2019, or are we going to have to wait 4 years?
We're going to have to wait a few more years, unfortunately. Psychedelic Science 2017 was just amazing.
And an amazing amount of work.
And an amazing amount of work, exactly. What it means is we basically turn into an event production company for 6 months prior to the conference, which is hard to juggle alongside phase 3 clinical trials and everything else that we're doing. So the next one is planned for 2021 or 2022. Couple of years down the road. There are regular psychedelic conferences. There are annual psychedelic conferences. So that's part of the reason why we don't feel the need to do one every single year. The Horizons Psychedelic Conference in New York is annual, and it's significantly smaller, but they had about 1,000 people last year. Psychedelic Science had about 3,300, just because it's a bigger conference and it's 6 days long. And then there's also the Breaking Convention conference in the UK, which also happens on an annual basis. I haven't been, but I'm hoping to get out there this year. But the next major psychedelic science conference, 2021 or 2022, we'd be expecting, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people for that one if the course of change happens. People just come out of the woodwork for these things from all over the world, and it's super exciting.
Right. The kinds of people I was meeting at the conference was, really making me hopeful. People from all over, psychiatrists who were, telling me their secrets and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, all right, you work inside the VA. Amazing.
Yeah.
And, just going to psychedelic conferences, I think for folks out there who haven't been to one, you probably should try to go to one. I know it could be an extraordinary expense if you live in Hong Kong or something, but there is one in Australia, I think, every year, EGA.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, I have not been to Australia, but that could be a big draw for me.
Good reason to go.
Yeah. I'm really hopeful that, we can start putting on some in the Midwest. I'm in Colorado, so there's been a kind of a lack of bigger events or, consistent events here.
We hosted one in Pittsburgh, or rather we co-hosted one in Pittsburgh.
Sleeping Octopus.
Sleeping Octopus Assembly on psychedelics or SOAP. And we hope to do more sort of one day conferences like that. There are more and more also just psychedelic societies popping up just all over the place. We get people reaching out to us on a weekly basis saying, hey, I started a psychedelic society in Madison, Wisconsin. I started one in Tampa, Florida. I started one in Austin, Texas, and started one in Portland. Well, I guess we weren't surprised about Portland, but
right.
But the rest of them maybe. Not Austin really either. But I mean, really people are self-organizing and getting together in these meetup groups and it's like having conversations. And one of them in Arizona called Entheogenic Research Awareness, ERA, is hosting a conference, the Arizona Psychedelics Conference, in February in Tempe at the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine.
Great memory.
actually a medical school. I have to remember because I got to put together my talk this week.
Right. I'll be there putting on a breathwork workshop the night before the conference starts. I think on Friday night as part of the conference track.
Oh, great.
Yeah, great. So I think there's like a Zendo talk, Innate Path is doing a talk or workshop, and then us at the end.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, Kyle and I are going to have a good time putting that one on, and we'll get to meet you there in person finally. And
look forward to it. That's great. We can do another on-site interview.
Perfect. So we're also I'm actually starting a psychedelic club here in Breckenridge, Colorado. There's such a tremendous history of use of psychedelics in the mountains of Colorado that not being organized is part of the culture, I guess, but adding some organization could really help others, not make all the same blunders the older folks did. Save a lot of pain and time.
Oh, absolutely. People have been organizing around psychedelics for decades and decades. I think asking those who have been in it for a while and asking elders and those from the previous generations is just exceptionally valuable. We're making some of it up, but we're not making all of it up.
Tremendously valuable history, yeah. So if you don't know old folks with a strong history of psychedelic use, you might try to find some. The older folks are incredibly valuable.
Nothing like psychedelic grandma.
Oh my God, I wouldn't be here without them. That's for sure. Cool. So how do you want to sign off? Just maps.org, maybe anything else, how they can find you on Twitter?
We are at Maps on Twitter, and Facebook is great. We're on Instagram and all of the fun social media platforms. Maps.org is the best place to learn about our current work. Also, to get involved, our participate link is right there up at the top. Also, we have a fundraising campaign happening now. It's our year-end fundraising campaign where we're trying to raise $300,000 for this research. We're about 57% funded and have a new fundraising video, actually a couple of new ones, including Rick talking about why we're doing what we're doing and what's so exciting about breakthrough status for MDMA. So cool new stuff to share. And then also zendoproject.org is where you can learn about the psychedelic peer support services and get involved there. And then I always welcome questions, even though I might take a little bit to get back. by email at brad@maps.org.
Brad, it was incredibly fun having you on the show, and I hope we get to do it again, maybe February in person.
Yeah, that'd be super, Joe.
Yeah, it would be great. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and until next time.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks again for a great podcast.
And there you have it, a update with Brad Burge, Director of Strategic Communications at MAPS, and I hope you liked it. Let us know what you think. Shoot us an email, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and if you'd like to hear about other stuff on the show, let us know. We'd also like to help you get that info. If you want to engage our community, we've got a group on Facebook called the Psychedelics Today Group, where over 1,200 people are gathered and chatting pretty regularly. It's a moderated group, so if anybody's being a jerk or saying unsafe things, Kyle or I or the community are going to call them out. If you try to do anything illegal on there, unfortunately, I'm going to have to ban you, just because that's the way Facebook works these days. Somebody the other day was trying to sell acid, and I was immediately upset and had to delete them and ban them. So sorry for doing that to you, whoever you are, but please don't do that in the group or you might get removed. So anyway, there's a great place just to ask questions and get to know other folks in the psychedelic world and what they're into and up to. Again, if you want to support us, please feel free to check out our class, Navigating Psychedelics, at psychedelicstoday.com, or leave us a small monthly donation at patreon.com/psychedelicstoday. I think that's it for this episode. This is Joe Moore from Psychedelics Today, signing off from Breckenridge, Colorado. Peace.